Welcome to Amazing Dinosaurs. I'm Dave, and this is a collection of Jurassic World dinosaurs from the Dino Trackers collection. And we're going to be arranging them from biggest all the way to the smallest. Let's get started with the largest figure. This is the Indominus Rex figure. And this figure from Dino Trackers is pretty special because it is actually a camo Indominus Rex. Check out that glowing green color in its neck and in its body. Now let's grab the next biggest dinosaur, which is this Tyrannosaurus Rex. I just bought this figure, and this is the Hunt and Chomp T-Rex. It's got pretty cool, unique coloring. It's got a headpiece and a new attack feature. Now let's set it up next in size, right next to the Indominus Rex. Let's see, now next in size is probably this Indoraptor figure. This Dino Trackers Indoraptor has a reflective blue skin coloring along with its classic gold stripe, and it has a variety of attack buttons. And let's set that up next in line, next to the T-Rex. Next, we're gonna grab this Epic Attack Carnotaurus figure. This Carnotaurus has the iconic clay red coloring. You can use the tail to move the head around, and there's a button to open and close its jaw. But best of all are these buttons on the side for more sound effects and lights too. That's pretty cool, so let's set him up as the next biggest dinosaur in this collection. I think it's time to open up this new Dino Trackers Habitat Defender Triceratops. Now I think this by far is the largest Triceratops I have in my entire collection. This Dino Trackers Triceratops has mostly brown coloring, it has a lighter underbelly, and some accenting on the top of its body. It of course has some huge horns coming out of its head and a very large frill. So overall this is really cool. And overall it actually feels more lightweight than a lot of figures, which is interesting for how big it is. But anyways, let's put this as the next biggest dinosaur in our Dino Trackers line. Next up, we're gonna grab this Sinotyrannus figure. This figure has a mostly dark green body, but this has some bright green and red along its face. And there's two hidden action buttons. One has a chomping action, and the other button has a tail swinging action. And let's set that up next in line. Here I've got a really weird looking dinosaur. I believe this one is called the Bistavosaur, something like that. It's a pretty unique name and a very unique looking dinosaur. It's got a tan colored body and black with a little bit of red and two hidden action buttons. One moves its head up and down for chomping, and the other actually activates these spines on its back. Let's get that one next in line right here. Now let's go for this huge Stegosaurus figure from the Dino Trackers series. It of course has the tracker backpack and some really cool coloring, plus two hidden action buttons on its back. The one on this side swings its tail upwards, and the button on the other side here swings its tail side to side. And so let's put this one next in line right here. Next up is this Orcoraptor figure, a very strange and unique looking dinosaur. It has a dark green and black body with feather texturing on the underside of its body, and a lever action on its back for some sound effects and chomping actions. So let's put that next in line. Next, let's grab this Eocarcharia dinosaur. This dinosaur has feather texturing over its entire body and is a lot more brightly colored than the Orcoraptor that we just saw. And it also has the lever on its back for chomping and sound effects. And there it is, next in line. Over here, we've got the Dryptosaurus figure. This figure has a dark brown and gray colored body with tons of spikes running from tail to head and a slide lever for the chomping action. And now let's put it next in size in line. And next up, this one isn't tall, but it certainly is quite large. This aquatic dinosaur is the Elasmosaurus. It's got a bright blue body and a super long neck, and two action buttons on its back. One moves its neck up and down, and the other moves its neck side to side and opens its mouth too. That's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and set it in line. Next up, let's grab the Regaliceratops figure. This dinosaur looks pretty similar to a Triceratops. It has the large frill in the front with some horns. It's got some sound effects, as you can hear, and it has a slide lever action on its back for more sound effects and movement. And let's put that right next to the Elasmosaurus. Over here, we've got the Diabloceratops dinosaur. This figure is bright red, and it has a light brown underbelly and a ginormous frill with some horns. And of course, it has a lever on its back for some sound effects and head movement. Here is the Nigersaurus dinosaur in the bright green and dark green coloring. It's got a super long neck and a super long tail as well, and the lever on its back for moving its head. And let's put that next in line here. Next up is this new Irritator dinosaur. This figure features quite a few different colors. It's got dark brown, light brown, some bright green, and some red eyes. And it has the lever on its back for the sound effects and chomping action. So let's put that right next to the Nigersaurus. Here is the Epic Attack Dilophosaurus figure. Now it's pretty small and you can't move the frills on its head, unfortunately, but it does have this cool button on its side, the lights, and a bunch of sound effects. This is a pretty cool figure, so let's put this next in line. Next in line is this new figure. I believe it's pronounced the Piatnitskisaurus. This figure has some pretty cool dark blue coloring with some bright green striping along the top, and even some orange and red along its face. It's also got quite a few spikes along the top of its face and underneath its chin as well, and a tiny little spine running along its back. So let's put that right next to the Dilophosaurus. Next up is the Scutosaurus figure in the bright orange coloring with some dark blue accenting along its back and its face. And check out those interesting horns coming out of its cheeks on both sides of its face too. It's pretty cool. Set that up next in line. Now let's check out the other new figure that I've got, the Pristosuchus figure. It looks like this dinosaur walks on all four legs. It has a dark green body with some lighter accenting along its back, and then a brown face. Plus, it has an action button right here on its back for a massive chomping action. Let's set that up next in line and grab our next dinosaur, which is a Zuniceratops figure. Now I have an older version of the Zuniceratops, but this one has new coloring, which is the brown, the tan, and the black. And it has an action button on its back for a stabbing action with its horns. So we'll set that up there. And our last figure, although it's not very small, it's the shortest. This is a Kronosaurus figure. Now this aquatic dinosaur is dark blue on the top and tan on the underbelly. And it has a lever right on its back for some sound effects and chomping action. And let's set that up as the final dinosaur in our Dino Tracker's biggest to smallest collection. First figure, however, is not from Dino Trackers. This is actually part of the 30th anniversary Jurassic Park collection. This is the real feel T-Rex figure designed to look like the old Jurassic Park one. The skin on its body is soft and rubbery, and it actually can eat smaller dinosaurs and store them in its stomach compartment. Next up is the Dino Trackers Endoraptor figure. This version is slightly larger than many of my other Endoraptor figures, and it has some roaring actions with its arms, and it has an action button on its back too. Here is the Epic Attack Carnotaurus figure. It's around the same size as many of my other Carnotaurus figures, and it features the red body with the brown top and a single action button on its back to operate its jaw. But best of all, there's these action buttons on its side for more sound effects and lights too. Here is the Dino Trackers Diabloceratops figure. It comes in a bright red coloring over all its body and has some massive horns, and it has an action on its back to swing its head back and forth. Next up is the Dino Trackers Sinotyrannus figure. It comes with this cool headset that you can take off of the dinosaur figure, and it has some pretty cool coloring, and it has two buttons. One activates its head, and the other button activates its tail. Right over here is the Dino Trackers Eocarcharia. This dinosaur has feather texturing over all its body. It's got some pretty bright coloring and the bright red along its face, and an action on its back to swing its head back and forth. This is the Gigantic Trackers Stegosaurus figure. It has some really cool coloring over all of its body. It's quite different from all the other Stegosaurus figures that I have. And of course it comes with the tracker backpack and two action buttons on its back. One swings its tail up and down, and the other swings it side to side. Here is the Dino Trackers Nigersaurus figure. This dinosaur stands on all four legs and has some pretty bright green on the front and darker green in the back. And there's one single action button on its back to move its head back and forth. Here's our first aquatic dinosaur of the collection. This is the Kronosaurus. It has the dark blue top and the yellow underbelly, and you can adjust all its fins and its tail too, and it has a single action on its back to operate its jaw. Next up is the Edaphosaurus figure. It looks pretty similar to a Dimetrodon with a huge spine on its back and standing on all four legs, but its spine is even a bit larger than a Dimetrodon's, and with this figure you can use the tail to move the head back and forth. Alright, now it's time for some ones that I haven't even opened up yet. This is the Orcoraptor figure. This is a pretty bulky looking figure. You can see that it has some feather texturing along the underside of its body, but not really along the top. You can tell that it's kind of a skin texture. And kind of like the Therizinosaurus, it has these huge claws on its hands. It's got some pretty bright accenting design on its tail, but not really anywhere else, which is interesting. But there is some right around its eyes too. And it looks like the arms, the legs, and the tail are adjustable, and there's an action button on its back to operate its jaw. Next up of the unopened figures is this Irritator figure. I think I have one or two other Irritator figures, so I'm excited to add this to my collection. Alright, here it is, and I gotta say, it looks even a bit different compared to my other Irritator figures. Its legs seem to be a lot shorter, whereas its body is super long. It has this really long tail, and of course it still has the spine that runs from its back down its tail, and it has some pretty cool coloring too, with the dark brown in the back and on its legs, the orange in the middle, and then some bright green along its head and its neck too. And it looks like its arms and its legs and its tail are adjustable, and there's that single action button on its back to operate its jaw. And the next unopened figure is this Regaloceratops. Let's go ahead and open it up and check it out. So obviously it looks quite a bit like a Triceratops. It stands on all four legs, it's got the horns on the front, as well as these additional horns along the top of its frill, and it's even got some spikes running down its back and its tail too. This is a pretty bright dinosaur as well. Most of it is that yellow color, it has some green along its face and along its back, and it looks like all four legs are adjustable. You can twist the tail around a bit, and it has an action button on its back for roar sound effects. Up next is the Dino Trackers Dryptosaurus figure. It has fairly dark coloring with the dark brown over most of its body and then the green accenting on its arms and on its tail as well. And boy, does this figure have tons of spikes along its body. And there's the action button to control the jaw and the sound effects. Over here is the Hammond Collection Baryonyx figure. It features a fully posable body on all of its limbs and has the classic blue coloring with the white stripe and the gray underbelly. Here's another Hammond Collection figure. This is the Concavinator. It too has a fully posable body with all of its limbs, and it features some pretty cool coloring with some bright orange along parts of it, the dark blue, the lighter underbelly, and some cool detailing around its eyes. Here is the Dino Trackers Zuniceratops figure. This version of the Zuniceratops has the brown body with some tan and black along its neck and an action button to activate its head. This next Dino Trackers figure, I believe, is called the Elaphrosaurus. It features a bright blue body with some yellow accenting along the side, and a darker face with some horns on the top, and it looks like its whole body is adjustable as well. The arms, the legs, the tail, the neck, and the jaw. Here is the Dino Trackers Herrerasaurus figure, and this Herrerasaurus looks quite a bit different compared to the older versions by Jurassic World. It features posable arms, legs, and tail, and an action button on its back for the chomping. This next figure is the Dino Trackers Austroraptor. This version features the tan body with some brown detailing and some brighter coloring around its head. And overall, it's shaped like a velociraptor, but the biggest difference is the shape of its head and its jaw. Here is the Dino Trackers Strike Attack Gigant Spinosaurus. This figure looks kind of like a Miragaia with the spines along its back and the huge spikes coming out of its shoulders, but it has a different shaped head, and this one has the orange coloring in the front and the tan in the back. Plus, it has an action that when you move its head back and forth, it moves its tail too. Next up is the Dino Trackers Strike Attack Dilophosaurus figure. This figure has very muted colors. It only has white, some black as well, and I think that's pretty much it. But it still has this really cool feature that when you move its tail, it activates its frills. Now here is the Hammond Collection Dilophosaurus figure. It looks quite a bit different compared to the Strike Attack figure that we just saw, but this figure is actually pretty cool because you can actually remove the frill to reveal just the head by itself, which apparently is a more realistic look for the Dilophosaurus in real life. Back here is the Hammond Collection Ceratosaurus figure. It features the fully posable body, has some pretty cool coloring over its whole body, and of course has the little horn on the top of its head. Here is the Dino Trackers Baby Brachiosaurus figure. I have a few other versions of this figure, and this one is in the brown coloring with the tan accenting along its back. Here is the Epic Attack Dilophosaurus figure, a little bit larger than many of my other Dilophosauruses. And interestingly, on this figure, you can't move the frills at all, but there is this action button on its side to activate some sounds and some light effects. Looks like here's another Zuniceratops figure from Dino Trackers. We've seen this one already. This one from Dino Trackers, I believe, is called Geniodectes cirrus. Features some bright coloring with the yellow that runs from its tail through its underbelly up to its face, and then the brown along the rest of its body. And it has an action button on its back to operate the jaw. Next up is a miniature Hammond Collection Velociraptor figure. It of course is extremely posable all over its body. It has a single stripe that runs down its entire side, and it's got some cool blue coloring right around its eyes too. And finally, here is the Dino Trackers Strike Attack Atrociraptor figure. This Atrociraptor has some bright yellow along the front, and then the back is a dark green color. It's also got some reflective silver coloring right around its eyes, and a single action button on its back to operate its head. First up is the massive Dino Trackers Indominus Rex figure. This has a fully posable body, and you can use the tail to control the head and chomp the jaw. Let's compare that to the Primal Attack Carnotaurus figure. This is one of my favorite dinosaurs. I love the coloring on it, and on this figure you can use the tail to control the neck and chomp the head too. Next up, let's do the Dino Trackers T-Rex versus the Primal Attack Albertosaurus. First up is the T-Rex in the new tan coloring with the yellow and black striping. It's got this adjustable, pretty detailed headpiece on it. It has the posable body with the legs, the arms, and the tail being movable, and a jaw-chomping attack. And up against that is this slightly smaller Albertosaurus figure from Primal Attack. It has a cool jungle green color with the orange detailing. It's got a bunch of bumps and spikes along the top of its head and along its back too. And you can use the tail to move the head around and chomp the jaw. Next up is the Dino Trackers Stegosaurus versus the Primal Attack Stegosaurus. We'll first check out the Dino Tracker version. This one has a lot more intricate coloring and a lot more variety in the coloring too. And it has 2 action buttons. The first swings the tail up and down, and the second button here activates the tail to swing side to side. Let's compare that with the Primal Attack version. It's pretty much the exact same shape and size, but it has very different coloring with the gray-blue coloring and the pink underbelly. And this figure only has 1 attack button hidden on its spine right here. When you press that down, it swings its tail. Next up is the Dino Trackers Bistahevesaur versus another Primal Attack Carnotaurus. First off, the Bistahevesaur is a lot smaller, but I think I actually like the coloring on this figure better. It's got some gray and then the orange specks, the tan, and then more dark gray-blue coloring along its face. And like many Dino Trackers figures, it has 2 attack buttons. The first activates the jaw, and the second button actually activates the spines on its back. And that's up against this Carnotaurus figure. I believe this is Carnotaurus Toro. It has a much darker coloring compared to the Carnotaurus that we saw earlier, but you can still use the tail to move the head around and chomp the jaw open and shut. Next up, we've got the Primal Attack Siatsmikararum versus the Dino Trackers Nigersaurus. First off is Primal Attack, and this is a really cool looking carnivore figure. It has a really cool color design with this gray striping in the back and then this blue kind of like lightning bolts coming down the sides. I especially love all the spikes that are along its back too. And you can use the tail to chomp the jaw open and shut. And up against that is this herbivore from Dino Trackers. This dinosaur stands on all 4 legs and has 2 tones of green. The light green in the front and the dark green in the back. And it has a single action button for the attack. It can move its neck up and down and side to side. For the next one, it's the Primal Attack Sarcosuchus versus the Dino Trackers Regaliceratops. This Sarcosuchus is one intense looking dinosaur. It looks pretty close to a modern crocodile, and it's got some bright orange and red, the dark purple along the top, and then the light blue body. And of course, the tail can move the head around and chomp the jaw open and shut. And here is the Regaliceratops from Dino Trackers. It has a much brighter body with this yellow coloring with some purple and green. It's got a ton of super tall spikes on its back. And this figure has the single action button on its back for the attack and the sound effects. Over here is a Baryonyx from Primal Attack versus this Irritator figure from the Dino Tracker series. This Baryonyx figure, I think it actually might be Baryonyx Grim. It's got some pretty cool coloring with the 2 tones of green, this yellow coloring, and then the tan body. And like many of the other Primal Attack figures, you can move the tail to move the head around, and there's sound effects too. And up against that is this Irritator dinosaur, which in my opinion looks even more fierce. It's got tons of cool coloring, shorter legs than normal for these types of dinosaurs, a huge spine on its tail that goes all the way up its back, and the single action button for the chomping and sound effects. Here is the Dino Trackers Orcoraptor versus the Primal Attack Carcharodontosaurus. First up, the Orcoraptor is a bit darker in color. It's got this dark green kind of jungle color and then the black along the back of its body. And it has a single action button for the sound effects and the chomping. Versus this Carcharodontosaurus figure in this bright tan coloring with the brown and orange striping from its back all the way up to its head. And it looks like this figure also has a single action button that activates the chomping. I don't think there's any sound effects on this one though. Here is the Dino Trackers Sinotyrannus figure versus the Primal Attack Sinoceratops. We'll first check out the Sinotyrannus figure. It's got those 2 tones of green, very similar to some of the other Dino Tracker figures, but it also has this bright red detailing along its face. And this figure has 2 action buttons. The first activates the tail swinging back and forth, and the second activates the jaw chomping. But interestingly, this is another one of the figures that doesn't have any sound effects built in. And that's versus this Sinoceratops figure, a much more neutral color with this gray and then this light tan and yellow coloring on its body. But on this figure, you can actually move the tail around to move the head alongside with the sound effects. I've got another Sarcosuchus figure from Primal Attack here versus this Dino Trackers Gigant Spinosaurus. From Primal Attack, this Sarcosuchus is very similar to the one that we saw earlier. Other than that, it has very different coloring with the jungle green coloring underneath and then the bright red on the top of its body. And this Gigant Spinosaurus is a whole lot smaller, but it looks kind of like a Stegosaurus with these spines on the top of its back. But of course, it has these huge spikes running out of its shoulders that are very different from a Stegosaurus. Next up is the Primal Attack Tarbosaurus versus the Dino Trackers Endoraptor. The Tarbosaurus has a very dark gray coloring. You can see a bunch of darker gray striping along its body. I love these huge spikes running along its entire spine, and I love the bright red coloring on its neck and on its chin too. And on this figure, the tail can move the head back and forth and chomp the jaw, but no sound effects, sadly. And now this Endoraptor figure is super reflective. It's got a blue reflective coloring over its whole body. I'd say it's a decent amount larger than the Tarbosaurus, and it has sound effects and attacks. You can activate them by moving the arms or by pressing this button on its back. This is the Dino Trackers Dryptosaurus versus the Primal Attack Majingasaurus. I think the Dryptosaurus has a ton more spikes than the Majingasaurus. It's got some on its head, on its back, and a ton on its tail. Check that out. And it has an attack button on its back for the chomping and sound effects. And the Majingasaurus is a little bit smaller, but it's got much brighter coloring with this green, yellow, and blue. And of course, you can move the tail around to get a really lifelike action, although it doesn't have an attack button to open and close the jaw. You have to do that manually. Over here, I've got the Primal Attack Kentrosaurus versus the Dino Trackers Diabloceratops. Now, the Kentrosaurus is pretty similar to a Stegosaurus. You can tell by these huge spines running down its back and that it stands on all four legs. But this figure has these spikes coming out of the sides of its stomach, no doubt for defense. And you'll notice that the spikes on its tail are a whole lot larger than a Stegosaurus's usually are. And it's actually got an action button on its back to swing those front spikes back and forth. And now it's time for the Diabloceratops, one of the coolest colored dinosaur figures from the Dino Trackers series. Check out this super bright red. That is super cool looking. And of course, it's got a massive frill on its head alongside these 4 huge horns. And there's an action button on its back for the attack and the sound effects. Next is the Primal Attack Edmontosaurus versus the Dino Trackers Eocarcharia. The Edmontosaurus, I believe, is an herbivore, and it's standing on all 4 legs, but it has some pretty cool coloring with this bright blue and the yellow on its face, and you can move the tail to move the head around. And then the Eocarcharia is definitely a whole lot scarier looking. Check out all this feather texturing over its entire body. Plus, it's pretty cool that they painted that red right around the eyes and on top of the head too. And check out this action button on its back for the chomping and sound effects. And finally, it's the Dino Trackers Pyroraptor figure versus the Primal Attack Ceratosaurus. Now, this Pyroraptor from Dino Trackers is definitely the smaller of the two, but I think it has the coolest coloring with this super bright yellow and then the blue along the rest of its body. Plus, it's got a bunch of feather texturing, although sadly, it does not have any attack feature. And here's the Primal Attack Ceratosaurus, a whole lot larger in size, although the coloring isn't quite as impressive with the red in the front and then the tan with a little bit of black detailing. But the best part is that this figure does have an attack button that you can press for the chomping and sound effects. The first unusual species is this Eocarcharia figure from the new Dino Trackers series. It's got a fantastic feathering texture over its whole body and a single lever action on its back for the chomping and roaring. Next up is the mighty Yangchuanosaurus figure. This has the green and brown coloring, and you can use the tail to control the head and open and close the jaw. Here is the Irritator dinosaur, and I think it's from the Dino Trackers series. This figure has some really cool coloring, and that same action button on its back for the chomping and roaring. Next up is this huge Quetzalcoatlus figure. If you're a big fan of the movies, you might remember this species in the Jurassic World Dominion movie. And it's got one button on its back for flapping its wings, and another button for moving its neck up and down and opening and closing its jaws. Right over here, I've got the Spinosaurus figure. This dinosaur walks on all four legs, and you can use the tail to move the head around and open and close the jaw. Next is a little bit of an older figure. This is a Concavinator figure. It's got this huge hump on its back that's red and purple, and its entire face is purple. And there's an action button on its back for a chomping action, and you can press on its spike to swing its tail back and forth. This aquatic dinosaur is called the Elasmosaurus. It's got a soft blue body, which I bet camouflages really well in the water, and it has two action buttons on its back. One swings its neck side to side, and the other moves its neck up and down. Here is the Proceratosaurus figure. This is the basic edition, so you can move its tail, its legs, and its arm, but sadly there is no action button. Still has some pretty cool coloring though. Next up is the Suchomimus figure. This version is in the yellow and brown, and it has two buttons on its back, one for chomping its jaw, and the other for swinging its tail. And I've actually got the other Suchomimus figure in here. This one is in the blue and yellow coloring. And this figure actually only has one action button, and that is for the chomping action. Check out this crazy looking figure. This is a Diabloceratops from the new Dino Trackers series. It's got the all red body, some gigantic horns on its head. It's got some sound effects, and the lever on its back for the action. Here's a slightly smaller dinosaur, but still pretty scary looking. This is the Majingasaurus dinosaur with the green, yellow, and blue coloring. And while you have to open and close its mouth manually on this figure, you can still use the tail to control the neck and the head. This next figure is from the new Dino Tracker series. This is the Orca-Raptor figure. It has some feather texturing on part of its body. It also has these massive claws on its front arms. And just like all the other Dino Tracker figures, has this lever on its back for the roaring and the chomping action. Next up, I've got an Albertosaurus figure in the green and orange coloring. And with this figure, you can move the tail around to twist the neck back and forth and to chomp the jaw. This next uncommon species is a crazy looking carnivore figure. This is a Tarbosaurus. Check out that red underneath its chin and all these huge spikes running down its back. Plus, you can use the tail to twist the neck around and open and close the jaw. This next figure is also quite large. This species is called a Ceops microrarum. It has the orange coloring on the sides and underbelly, and the dark blue on top, with all these rows of spikes on its head and on its back. And of course, its special feature is that you can use the tail to twist the neck around and open and close its jaw. Check out those really cool teeth. Next up is an herbivore figure. This is a Sinoceratops figure, and this version comes in the soft green coloring with some tan detailing and dark orange. And with this Sinoceratops figure, you can use the tail to move its head around in all sorts of directions. Check it out, it's another herbivore figure. This uncommon species is called an Ouranosaurus. It has a huge spine running along the top of its back and some really cool coloring. It's got the green on its body, bright yellow, orange, and even some blue on its face. And it has this action button on its side for moving its head and sound effects. Right over here, I've got the Ankylosaurus figure. Now this one is a bit older of a figure, but it's still pretty uncommon of a species. And it has two action buttons on its back. The first moves its head up and down, and the second button activates its tail for swinging back and forth. Alright, here's another carnivore. This is a Cryolophosaurus figure, and this version is the yellow one with the brown coloring and the huge crown on the top of its head. And with this figure, although you have to open and close its mouth manually, you can still use the tail to move its neck around. This next four-legged dinosaur is called a Nigersaurus. It's got the two tones of green on its body, and since it's from the Dino Tracker series, it has this special feature button on its back used for moving its head in all sorts of directions. This next uncommon species is called a Dryptosaurus figure, also from the new Dino Tracker series. It's got more dark coloring over most of its body, and it's got spikes all over on its head, on its back, and a bunch on its tail as well. And it's got the action button on its back for chomping and sound effects. This next figure is called the Gigant Spinosaurus dinosaur. It looks kind of like a Stegosaurus because it has those frills on its back, but it also has these huge spines coming out of its shoulder too. And it is actually spring-loaded so that when you move the head back and forth, it actually swings the tail back and forth too. Next up, I've got the Piatsnitskisaurus. It's got some pretty cool blue coloring over its whole body, and also some red, some orange, and some light green. Next up is the Nothosaurus dinosaur. It's a pretty weird looking species. It's got some short legs and a really long neck and narrow snout. Here is the Shringosaurus dinosaur in the yellow and brown coloring. It walks on all four legs, and it has this massive pair of horns on the top of its head. Next up is the Austroraptor dinosaur figure. It comes in the tan and brown coloring and has a bit of dark orange along the top of its head, and it has a really long and narrow snout. Next up is a Herrerasaurus, which you might have heard before, but this is actually a pretty new figure and looks quite a bit different compared to the old version. Plus, it has an action button on its back for a chomping motion. This is the Geniodecticirrus figure. This version comes in the dark brown and yellow coloring, and it also has an action button on its back for opening and closing its jaw. Here is another aquatic dinosaur. This one is called the Tanystropheus figure. It's got some short little legs that you can adjust and a bright blue body, and when you move the tail up and down, it actually swings its neck way down to the bottom. Now here's a crazy looking dinosaur. This uncommon species is called a Scutosaurus. It's got a bright orange body and it walks on all fours, and check out these huge horns underneath its chin. I've got a few more winged dinosaurs in here. This species is called Rhamphorhynchus. It's got some bright yellow-green wings and a bunch of crazy looking teeth in its mouth. This next dinosaur species is called the Zundaripterus. It's got bright yellow wings and a brown body, and you can actually see feather texturing all over its wings too. Plus, it's got a pretty unique looking face and jaw. Next up is a Dracorex figure. This one is colored bright green with some gray striping, and check out all those horns on the back of its head. Oh, you know what? I've got another winged dinosaur in here. This one is called the Tapehara. It's got a lot of orange and some green on its body, but the coolest part is this face. Check that out. Plus, there's a button on its back to flap its wings. The next dinosaur is an Elaphrosaurus figure. It comes in the blue coloring with some yellow and dark brown detailing. Check out those huge horns on the top of its head. Here is the extreme battle damage Quilmosaurus figure. It has the light green body with the dark green on top and the bright red chin. And check out that battle damage on the side that you can click on and off. Alright, I've got another aquatic dinosaur. This one is called the Plesiosaurus. It's got a dark green body with the white underneath, also to camouflage in the ocean, and a single action button on its back to move its fins. This next uncommon figure is the Masiakasaurus dinosaur. It has the dark red body with the yellow spotting all over, and spotting is pretty unusual for these dinosaur figures, and the single action button on its back for chomping its jaw. This is the Rugops primus figure. It has some feather texturing over its body and the soft green coloring on its body with the black on its tail and on its face. Here is the Miragaia figure. This figure looks quite a bit like a Stegosaurus, but this one also has the huge spikes coming out of its shoulders and a lot more spikes on its tail too. And here is a Pachycephalosaurus figure. I believe this one is from the Legacy collection, and this figure has a special feature that when you press down on its tail, it has the headbutting action. This little dinosaur here is called a Troodon. It has the pink underbelly and gray on the sides and the black spine and the black along the top of its head too. Next up is the Protoceratops figure. There's a few versions of this, and this one is in the bright green with yellow accenting. This figure I believe is called the Sauropelta. It has some huge spikes coming out of its shoulders and is actually spring-loaded, so you can swing its shoulders back and forth with those huge spikes. Here's a crazy looking figure. This is actually a hybrid dinosaur from the first Jurassic World movie. This is a Triceratops and Stegosaurus hybrid. Check out that battle damage right on the side too. And it even has an action button. When you press down its tail, you get a stabbing action with its head. And last of all, I've got the Zuniceratops figure. This is a newer version that is in the brown coloring with the tan and black on its face, and it has a single action button for a stabbing action. this one right here. You may be thinking you haven't seen this one before, and that is because it is custom painted. It is an I-Rex in a camouflage green color. And check out that super bloody mouth too. Next up of my newest figures, we've got the Dino Tracker Endoraptor figure. And it features some attack slashing actions. And an attack button on its back too. The next new figure is this Wild Roar Eocarcharia figure. It features the feather texturing all over its body. It's got some bright coloring along its head and a slide lever action for different chomps and sound effects. Next up of these new figures is, I believe, the Chronosaurus. This dinosaur is an aquatic dinosaur, so it has 4 fins. It's got these huge teeth in its mouth and a slide lever action for some roaring sound effects and chomping motions. Next up, I've got a medium-sized Sinotyrannus figure from the Dino Tracker series. You can see this huge headpiece, and it also has 2 action buttons on its back. One moves its jaws, and the other swings its tail. Next up with the new figures is this epic Attack Carnotaurus figure. It has the classic orange-red coloring all over its body, and the special part is it's got these 2 action buttons for battle damage and sound effects. And not only that, but it also has a jaw-chomping action. Here's an even larger figure. This is the Extreme Battle Damage Allosaurus figure. This is the largest Allosaurus I have, and you can check out that Extreme Battle Damage right there on its side. Plus, it also has an action button on its back for sound effects and chomping. Here's another T-Rex I bet you haven't seen before. That's because this is another custom colored one. This is a battle damage T-Rex. You can see the battle damage turned on and off on its side, and it is custom colored into the camo green. It's really cool. Next up is one that I bought just a couple weeks ago. This is a Scorpiovenator in totally new coloring. It's mostly brown and has some orange detailing running along its neck and its head. And this Scorpiovenator actually came as a pack with this Iguanodon figure. And check it out, they both have an attack button when you press down on its back. I think we all know this next one. This is the Therizinosaurus figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It features these huge claws in its hands, and you can use the tail to swing the torso back and forth, and use the button for an attack action. This dinosaur is the new Diabloceratops from the Dino Tracker series. It is the only Triceratops-looking dinosaur that I have that has this bright red coloring, and it's got a ginormous frill on the front of its head too. Plus, there is a little button on its back for sound effects and attack movements. This next figure is a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and this one I got just a week ago, and it is custom colored to look way more lifelike. Plus, they added a bunch more battle damage. And this is the Terran T-Rex, so it has the button on its back for the tearing action. Next, why don't we grab these huge figures way in the back. I can't even show this full one on camera, it's so big. This is the Dreadnoughtus figure, and it is probably one of the largest and longest figures that I have. Just look at the size of this thing. This is crazy. Next up in the back here is another huge one, but not quite as large. This is the Apatosaurus figure, and it too has a pretty long neck and a long tail, and you can still move its head around and open and close its mouth. I think that's a pretty cool detail for how big this figure is. All right, let's see what's next here. This is the Hammond Collection Ceratosaurus. It has the classic coloring for Ceratosauruses, and it features very posable arms, legs, tail, neck, and of course, the mouth. Here's another Hammond Collection figure. This is the Concavenator, and this figure looks pretty wild. It's got an interesting looking spine coming out of half of its back, and it's got a huge orange tail, and of course is extremely posable. Let's keep going with these Hammond Collection figures. This one is the Baryonyx, and just like the others, is super posable and features the gray coloring with the dark blue on top. This next figure is a bit smaller. This is the Strike Attack Zunoceratops. This, I think, is the second version of the Zunoceratops, and this one features the brown coloring with some tan and black. And it has an action button on its back. Next up is the Edaphosaurus figure. This figure reminds me of a Dimetrodon because of the huge spine along its back, but I think this dinosaur spine might be even a little bit larger. And it features an action where you can move the tail to twist the head back and forth. Over here, I've got the giant Dino Trackers Stegosaurus figure. It comes with the backpack that I have attached right here, and it has totally different coloring compared to the other Stegosaurus figures that I have. Plus, it features 2 buttons on its back, both to move its tail. This is the Hammond Collection Ankylosaurus figure. It is quite a bit larger than the other Ankylosaurus figures I've got and is very posable. You can even open and close its mouth. Here is a Triceratops figure from the Jurassic World Dominion series. It's got the green body with the dark green on its head and the orange right along the front too. Over here is the Irritator Raptor. This one is super brightly colored. It has an interesting spine running down its back and on both sides of its tail. And on this figure, if you press down, you get a chomping action. Here is the Wild Roar Dryptosaurus dinosaur figure. It's got spikes all over its tail, running up its back, up to its head, and it has an action on its back that you can use for chomping actions. This weird looking dinosaur figure is the Siamosaurus. It stands on all 4 legs and has a dark blue body with a spine on its back, kind of like a Spinosaurus. And on this figure, the tail controls the head and the jaw. We saw one Scorpio-Venator earlier that had different coloring. This was the original one, and I believe this one is from Jurassic World Dominion. It has the yellow sides with the dark blue top and the white detailing. And of course, when you press down on its back, you get a chomping action. Here is the Ankylosaurus figure in the orange coloring with the brown on top. And like many other figures, the tail controls the head and the jaw. I've also got a few Rajasaurus figures in here. I believe this one was the earlier version with the brown coloring and the dark blue. And this one is a bit more recent. It's dark blue all over its body and it has the white along its neck and its chin. This is an extremely recent one. This is the Epic Attack Dilophosaurus. This figure is a little bit larger than most of my Dilophosauruses. It has the dark green body and the attack button right here on the side. It's pretty cool that it lights up, but sadly on this figure, you cannot open or close the frills. I think that's a pretty big bummer. Here is the Austroraptor figure. You can tell it looks pretty similar to a Velociraptor, but it has a much longer and narrower snout. Speaking of raptors, here's another one. This is a Megaraptor figure. It comes in the red and dark blue coloring, and when you press down on its body, you get a chomp action. This is the Sound Surge IREX figure. It's a lot smaller than many of my IREX figures, but it still has some pretty decent detailing and of course the sound effects. Next up for the new figures, I've got a Nothosaurus dinosaur. This is a pretty long and short dinosaur, but it's got some gnarly teeth. Check that out. This next figure is the Elaphrosaurus dinosaur in the bright blue. It's got some yellow-green coloring, and it features posable arms, legs, tail, neck, and head too. Next up is the Extreme Damage Geniodectes Cirrus. While most of its body is this dark gray coloring, it has bright blue and red on the top of its head, and of course, the battle damage on the side. And here's another Geniodectes Cirrus. This is not the Battle Damage edition, and it has different coloring too. Plus, this one has an action button to chomp its jaw. I've got quite a few more Extreme Damage dinosaurs. This is the Atrociraptor Extreme Damage version. This Atrociraptor is in the white and dark blue, and of course, check out that battle damage. The next Extreme Damage dinosaur, I believe is pronounced the Coeluris. It comes in dark green and dark red, and the battle damage, of course. The final Extreme Damage that I have of my new figures is this Pyroraptor. It is in the classic red with black, and of course, there's the battle damage. I've also got a little baby Stegosaurus here, and this one is in the bright green. It's even got some gold around its eyes, and the red spines. And finally for my new figures is the Rugops Primus dinosaur. It has feather texturing all over its body, and you can pose the arms, the legs, the neck, and the jaw. it off with this gigantic Giganotosaurus figure. This is one of the largest Giganotosauruses that I currently have, and this figure has some really cool attack features. First is with this button on the top that swings its entire torso back and forth. There's also a button on the bottom of its tail to activate just the jaw by itself. Next, this T-Rex has one of my favorite special features. It actually can break free from its cage that's around its face. By pressing the button on its back, it breaks free and roars at the same time. That is super cool. This dinosaur is our first extreme battle damage dinosaur. This is an Allosaurus and it is part of the Jurassic World Dominion series. You can check out that huge battle damage on the side that you can open up to reveal what's underneath and close it up all the way as well. This is a really cool and huge figure. Next, we've got a really interesting T-Rex figure right here. This one is all disassembled. You can see all the insides of this Tyrannosaurus Rex. You can see the muscle of its tail, you can see the intestines, and you can actually lift it up to show even more underneath. Plus, you can actually reassemble it so it looks like a normal T-Rex. I think the legs and the tail are in this bin somewhere, so we'll probably see them in a little bit. Let's check out this other giant T-Rex figure right here. This is camouflage custom colored. And I really like this figure because of the attack features. You can use its tail for a chomping action, chomps downward, or you can lift the tail down and it lifts its head up for a roar. That is super cool, and I think these features make it look really lifelike. Next up, we've got the extreme battle damage Indominus Rex, and it looks like he's chomping on a little Spinosaurus figure. That's pretty cool. But let's check out that extreme battle damage on the side. You can turn it on and turn it off just with the click of a button. Plus, there's a button on its tail for chomping and roaring. This Indominus Rex's arms are huge as well, and check out the size of those claws. Over here, we've got an Albertosaurus figure with extreme battle damage on the side. Plus, it's got some on its skin as well. And just like the Allosaurus that we saw earlier, you can flip down the rib cage, you can see the stomach underneath, or you can close it all completely and hide the battle damage entirely. Next up, we've got a Scorpius Rex figure, and this has some really cool attack features. The first button on its back activates the jaw with sound effects, which is pretty cool, but it also has a second button for the claw slashing action, which I think is really cool. And that's not all. The tail is actually spring-loaded, so you can swing it back and forth to hit other dinosaurs with that poisonous quills. The next special featured dinosaur is this giant Pentaceratops figure. And just like the T-Rex that we saw earlier, it can break free from its cage by pressing a button on its back. Let's check that out. Ready, 3, 2, 1, go! Wow, that is so cool. And there's also a second button to swivel its torso back and forth too. Up next, I've actually just bought this new one to show in this video. This is the Jurassic World Dominion Extreme Damage Atrociraptor. I have quite a few other dinosaurs from this series, so I'm super excited to add a new Atrociraptor to them. So let's check out this battle damage on the side. Check that out. You can reveal it just by the click of a button, and it shows on both sides. Next, we've got another giant T-Rex figure with extreme battle damage on both sides, just like the Atrociraptor that we just saw. You can click it on and off. It's really cool, plus the rest of its body is fully posable. You can even open its mouth all the way for a giant roar. Up next, we've got an unusual looking dinosaur. This is an Ankylosaurus, and this one has a pretty cool moving feature that's really lifelike, I think. You can use its tail to move its neck around to look in all different directions, plus there's a button to even open and close its jaw too. So this feature gives this dinosaur some super lifelike movements. Next, we've got a giant Endoraptor figure. This figure has the classic coloring for an Endoraptor. You can use the tail to move the neck and the head around, and even some of the torso too. And there's two buttons on its tail. The first one moves its arms, and the second button at the bottom of its tail opens and closes its jaw. So you can use all three of these all together to make it look really lifelike. Here is a new Spinosaurus from the Jurassic World Dominion movie. This dinosaur has some really cool coloring, but the special feature is when you press down on its body, it lifts its head up, and it has a ton of sound effects too. Right over here, we've got the Jurassic World Dominion Extreme Battle Damage T-Rex. So this figure is similar to the T-Rex that we saw earlier with the battle damage on its side that you can turn on and off on both sides, but it has entirely different coloring. It's a lot more orange, and it has some gray on the top as well. Next, looks like we've got a Pteranodon figure. This figure is ginormous. It's probably a foot from wingtip to wingtip, and it has two special feature buttons on its back. As you can hear, the first one activates the sound effects and also flaps its wings. And the second button in the front activates its jaw and more sound effects too. I really like how big this figure is, plus you can get some real lifelike wing flapping too. Over here, we've got another Pteranodon figure, but this one is actually from the Hammond collection. And the special feature of this dinosaur is that it is a soft, rubbery texture, as opposed to a hard plastic like many of the figures. So this figure is really poseable, especially because of that rubber feeling that makes it feel like a real wing would. All right, here are our missing T-Rex parts. So let's actually go ahead and put them on to our T-Rex right here. All right, well, it looks like I'm missing a few pieces here still, but you eventually would be able to reassemble it to make it look entirely like a healthy T-Rex. Next up, we've got the Tyrannosaurus figure. And the special feature on this dinosaur is this slide lever action that moves its neck and gives a ton of different sound effects. Up next, I've got a little baby Triceratops with the battle damage that you can open and close on the side. Here's also a small Herrerasaurus figure with that same opening and closing battle damage on the side. This, I think, is the first Velociraptor of this bin, and the special feature on this dinosaur is the side-to-side slashing action. It is spring-loaded, so you can twist it, and it swings way back and forth. Here's another Herrerasaurus figure, but this figure does not have battle damage, but rather you can use the tail to open and close the mouth. And for how small the figure is, that's a pretty cool feature. And here we've got another Velociraptor figure, but this one has the extreme battle damage on the side that you can turn on and off. And it shows up on both sides too. First up, we've got the extreme chomping Tyrannosaurus Rex figure. It's a medium-sized T-Rex figure, and of course it has the button on the top of its head for chomping. Next up is the Primal Attack, Control, and Conquer Carnotaurus figure. It's got a bright orange-red body, and it has a chomping action as well as a head-moving action. Here is the epic Roarin' Tyrannosaurus Rex figure, and it's one of my favorites. It's quite a lot larger than the T-Rex that we just saw. It's got a light brown body with the dark brown on top, and you can use the tail to control the head and open and close the jaw. This next ginormous figure is the Destroy and Devour Indominus Rex. This figure's even bigger than the T-Rex figures that we've seen, and it has two actions. First, it has an arm attack, and it has a roaring jaw action. And now let's grab this huge aquatic dinosaur. This is the Real Feel Mosasaurus figure. This dinosaur was one of the stars of the first Jurassic World movie, and you can open and close its jaw, move its fins, and as you can tell from the name, it has a much more lifelike feel than many of the other figures. It's a bit softer. Up next is the Bite and Fight Tyrannosaurus Rex figure. Now this T-Rex may look similar to the previous ones, but it has a totally different attack. It has a tear-in attack with its mouth. See how its neck twists all the way to the side? And it also has a secondary button for swinging the tail back and forth too. This figure is really wild. This is the Primal Attack Massive Biters Tarbosaurus. It's got a ton of crazy spines running all the way up from its head to its tail. It has some pretty cool coloring. I like how it's subtle along its body and then bright red along its neck. And it has a jaw-chomping action too. This figure is another Primal Attack Massive Biters figure. This is the Seats Microrarum, and it's got some pretty crazy coloring and details. Check out all those little spikes right on the top of its head and on its back. And of course it has some super bright orange and blue coloring too. And best of all, it has a jaw-chomping action as well. Up next is the Primal Attack Control and Conquer Carnotaurus Toro figure. It has a dark brown body, a lot darker than the Carnotaurus that we saw earlier, and it has the jaw-chomping action and the head-moving action too. This is another Massive Biters from the Primal Attack series. This is the Albertosaurus figure. This figure is pretty recognizable because of the green all over the body with the orange stripe on both sides. And of course, it has the jaw-chomping action and the head-moving action too. Also from the Massive Biters toy line is this Sarcosuchus figure. This figure is really long, it's probably around a foot in length. It's got all sorts of texturing and detailing. You can see 2 rows of spikes right on its back that go all the way down its tail. And of course it has a long and narrow snout, very similar to an alligator's, and it has the jaw-chomping action too. Here is the Primal Attack Soundstrike Majungasaurus. And as you can hear, it comes with sound effects, although it seems to be a little bit broken at the moment. This is a bit smaller of a figure, but it still has some really cool coloring and tons of little spikes and details all over its body. And while there's no button to open and close the jaw on this figure, you can use the tail to move the head around. Up next is the Primal Attack Soundstrike Irritator. This figure has a similar body shape to a Baryonyx, although it does have a little spine that runs down its back. And on this figure, there's no button to open and close the mouth, but you can use the tail to move the head around. And check out those sound effects too. Here's another Primal Attack Soundstrike figure. This is the Sinoceratops. And this figure comes in the light gray with some tan detailing. The coolest coloring and detailing is this bright orange and yellow along its face and the super black eyes. And this figure has a head attack action. Check that out, and sound effects too. Next up for Primal Attack is this Soundstrike Parasaurolophus figure. It is bright yellow, it has some reflective pink along its back and its legs, and the best part is that it has a head attack action. Also from the Soundstrike series is this Pteranodon figure. This version is in the dark orange and maroon coloring along its wings, and it has 2 action buttons, one to operate the mouth with sound effects, and the other button to operate the wings. Here is the Primal Attack Soundstrike Cryolophosaurus figure. There are other versions of this dinosaur, but this one is in the bright yellow, brown, and orange coloring. And there is no button to open and close the mouth, but you can use the tail for a head attack action. Here's another Pteranodon figure from Primal Attack. This one has some even cooler coloring, I think. While it's mostly brown, it has some really cool green striping along its wings and a darker green coloring along its face. And just like the other Pteranodon figure, there's one button to operate the mouth and another button to flap the wings. Here is the Primal Attack Edmontosaurus figure. This figure stands on all 4 legs. It's got some light tan and dark green-blue coloring, with the brightest coloring along its face. And like many other figures, this comes with a head attack feature. Now here is a Savage Strike figure. This is the Styracosaurus. It's a pretty small figure. This version comes with the light green and brown with the bright orange and yellow detailing along the face. And this figure has a head thrash attack that you activate by pressing on the tail. Up next is the Pachycephalosaurus figure from Savage Strike. It's colored bright green on the underbelly and orange along the rest of the body, and it has a head ramming action that you activate by pressing on the tail. Up next is a Velociraptor figure from the Attack Pack series. It's dark blue with some red detailing along the top, and it has a fully posable body. From the Savage Strike series is this Velociraptor Charlie figure. It's bright green and has some darker green along the top, and the coolest part of all is that this figure has a claw slashing action by pressing this button on the top. Check it out, here's another Velociraptor figure from the Savage Strike series. This is Velociraptor Delta. This Velociraptor is colored a much more dark blue-green color, but just like the other figure, it has a button on its back for the claw slashing action. Over here I've got two different Stygimoloch figures. This one is from Jurassic World, and this one is from Camp Cretaceous, both from the Savage Strike toy line. They've got quite a bit of different coloring along their whole body, but they both still have that super hard shelled head for headbutting with the spikes right along the back. And both these figures have a head ramming action when you press down on the tail. Next up from Camp Cretaceous Savage Strike is this Plesiosaurus figure. It is way smaller than the Mosasaurus figure that we saw earlier. It's got a much longer neck and a mouth that you can open manually, and there is a button on its back to move the flippers up and down. Here is a wild looking winged dinosaur. This is the Tapehara from the Savage Strike series. It's got some crazy cool coloring and texture detailing along its wings, and a super bright head and frill right on the top of its head. Plus there's a tiny little button on its back to flip the wings up and down. I've got two other winged dinosaurs. These two are from the Attack Pack, and I believe they are called the Rampharanchus dinosaur. One of them's a bright green color with some darker green on the body, and the other figure has some white, dark blue, and orange. And both of them have a super long and narrow snout with tons of huge teeth inside. This is the Sauropelta figure from the Savage Strike series. It's got a fully armored body all over, and it's got tons of spikes along its shoulders, and it has a spring-loaded spike attack action. Next up is a Dilophosaurus figure from the Savage Strike series. This figure features the giant frill right beside its head and an attack button when you press down on the tail. Here is the Minmi figure from the Attack Pack series. Like the Sauropelta, it has a fully armored body, and it's got spikes all over its back instead of the large ones on its shoulders. This next figure is from the Attack Pack series too. This is the Troodon. It's got a pretty small body, it has an interesting spine running along its back, and on the top of its head too. Here is a Dimorphodon figure from the Attack Pack series. It has bright orange and red on the underside of its wings, while the rest of its body is a dark green color, and you can manually open and close the mouth too. Next from the Attack Pack is this Herrerasaurus figure. It's got some pretty bright coloring with the soft green and darker green and light blue coloring right along the top, and this figure is fully posable too. Also part of the Attack Pack series is this bright green Dracorex. There's some gray striping along its back and on its legs, and it's got tons of spikes along the back of its head. This is the Calavosaurus figure from the Attack Pack series. It stands on all four legs and has three different colors. It's got bright orange on the top, some light blue along the tail, and the rest of its body is a dark blue color, except for its mouth, which is bright blue again. And finally, from the Attack Pack series is this tiny little Ornithosceles figure. Most of its body is a dark brown color. It has some yellow detailing along the top with the gray underbelly. This dinosaur really looks like it could run fast. The biggest dinosaur in this whole collection, and its special feature, first off, is a clawing action, and secondly, a huge jaw-chomping action, plus it even has a compartment in its mouth where you could feed it a few small dinosaurs. The next special feature dinosaur is this Tyrannosaurus Rex figure in the camouflage coloring, and its special feature is if you move the tail up, it has a roaring action. They can move side to side, and if you move the tail downwards, it has a chomping action. The next special feature dinosaur is this giant Giganotosaurus figure, and I haven't seen an attack feature like this anywhere else. You can activate the main attack by pressing this button right here, and it swings its entire torso around. And not only that, but there's also a button to operate just the jaw as well. Next, I've got a Battle Damage Edition giant Allosaurus figure. The main special feature is this battle damage on the side that you can open and close, and you can even lift the ribs up to reveal the stomach underneath as well. Plus it has an additional button on its back for the attack chomping action. The next special feature dinosaur is this older T-Rex figure. This figure came out when Hasbro was making the figures for Jurassic World, and it has a pretty unique chomping action. First, you press down on the tail to lift its head up for a roar, and then you move the tail for this massive chomping action. Next, I've got a Jurassic World Dominion Battle Damage Tyrannosaurus Rex. They've released Battle Damage T-Rexes in the past, but this one has some brand new orange coloring, and of course the battle damage right on the side that you can turn on and off with the click of a button. This dinosaur is the Therizinosaurus from Jurassic World Dominion, and it has some pretty cool texturing and coloring along its body, as well as these huge claws in its hand. And this dinosaur's special feature is that it can swivel its entire torso back and forth, and it has a chomping action too. Next up is the Ankylosaurus figure from Jurassic World Dominion. It has the orange and brown body with tons of bumps and spikes along all of its body, and its special feature is that it has a tail that can actually move the head around in a pretty lifelike way, and even open and close the jaw. This is the Grab and Growl Endoraptor figure that came out during Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. And this figure's special feature is it has a tail that can move its torso around and twist and turn in all sorts of directions. And it also has a button for slashing its claws and for chomping its jaw too. Here is the Ouranosaurus figure. This one I believe is an herbivore. It's got a huge spine on its back, and its special feature is this lever on its side that you can press for different sound effects and for different poses too. Here is the Pentaceratops dinosaur figure from Jurassic World. It's got a huge frill and a ton of horns on its face, and this figure's special feature is first a head ramming action and also a torso moving action. You can move its torso back and forth. This is the Carcharodontosaurus figure in the blue edition. It's got some pretty cool accenting and detailing on its body, and this figure's special feature is an attack button on its back for a big chomping action. Here is a Carnotaurus figure, and this one looks quite a bit different, although it still has the same coloring. It's got some big eyes that you can blink by pressing this button up here, and you can use its tail for a chomping action. This special feature dinosaur is the Sarcosuchus. It's got a super long body, looks a lot like an alligator, and its special feature is a button on its tail that opens and closes the jaw as well as spins the head. Here is the Sinoceratops figure in the gray coloring with the tan detailing. And this figure's special feature is the tail that moves the head up and down, side to side, and in all different directions. This Jurassic World dinosaur is the Majungasaurus. It's got the green, yellow, and blue body, and its special feature is the tail that can move its head in all different directions, although you still have to manually open the mouth. Here's a pretty special looking Parasaurolophus. It has the yellow body, but it has some reflective pink coloring along its back and on its legs. And the special feature for this dinosaur, like the ones we just saw, is that you can use the tail to move the head up and down and all around, plus with sound effects. Here is Velociraptor Blue, and this figure is pretty special because it has a button at the top of its head for some sound effects and chomping motion. And if you touch under its chin, it actually has a walking action too. Next up is a giant Pteranodon figure. It has some pretty cool yellow and brown coloring, and its special feature is that it has this button right on its back for the wing flapping motion. Next up is this smaller dinosaur. I believe it's an Atrociraptor, and you can actually fit it on your finger, and it's battery powered. So when you power it up, it'll actually move around. It's got some sound effects too. Looks like it's kind of sleeping right now. This special feature dinosaur I believe is called the Kentrosaurus. It's got these huge spikes coming out of its sides right here, and its special feature is this lever right on its back that when you push it, it swings its torso back and forth so that it stabs with those huge spikes. Next is a very unique dinosaur. I don't know if you'd call this a special feature, but it's actually a stretch T-Rex, and on the inside is a liquid, and it's just really relaxing and kind of fun to play with. Next up for the Jurassic World figures is this Sound Surge Giganotosaurus figure. It's a smaller figure, and its special feature is the sound effects. Next up is this small Ankylosaurus figure, and the special feature for this figure is actually this shell that's super spiky. You can actually take that off to reveal the normal armor plating underneath. Next up is a very new figure. This is the Elasmosaurus figure. This is an aquatic dinosaur and it has two buttons on its back. The first swings its head side to side, and the second button moves its head up and down. So you can actually press both of them at the same time to get different types of movements. Here's another aquatic dinosaur. This is the Kronosaurus figure. It's a bit smaller than the Elasmosaurus figure, and it has a single button on its back that you can swing back and forth for different chomping actions with sound effects. Next up is the Dino Tracker's Orcoraptor. This figure has feather texturing on the lower half of its body, and its special feature is this lever action right on its back for the chomping and sound effects. The next special feature dinosaur is the Dryptosaurus figure. It has tons of spikes all over its body and a ton on its tail as well. And like many of the Dino Tracker series figures, it has this lever on its back that you can use for the chomping action and sound effects. This big dinosaur, I believe, is called the Regaloceratops, and this one I bought very recently, also part of the Dino Trackers series. And just like the others, its special feature is this lever on its back, used to move its head back and forth with sound effects. This next special features figure is the Gigantic Tracker's Stegosaurus. It's got the backpack right there on its back and two buttons on its back too, both of which control the tail. One controls up and down, and the other controls side to side. Next up is a much smaller figure. This is the Sauropelta. It has some huge spikes on its shoulders, and its special feature is that it's spring-loaded, so it actually can swing its shoulders back and forth so that it can attack with those spikes. And finally, the smallest figure in this special features collection is this juvenile T-Rex. It's bright green and has some dark green coloring on the top, and its special feature is that you can chomp the jaw by moving the tail up and down, which is pretty cool considering how small this figure is. First up, we've got the Jurassic World Dominion Super Colossal T-Rex. This figure has a dark brown side and black top with a lighter underbelly, and it's got adjustable arms, legs, and a tail. And up front, I can tell that the plastic is a bit softer on its neck. The rest of its head is a hard plastic, and you can open it up way wide, and you're able to actually swallow smaller dinosaurs down to the stomach compartment. That's pretty cool. Next up, we've got another super colossal figure. This is an Indominus Rex. It has the classic light gray body, and is pretty detailed with all the spikes and the spines. It's got some spines up there, it's got some behind its elbows, it's got those super long claws on its hand. And just like the T-Rex, you can adjust the arms, the legs, you can swing the tail around. But on this figure, you can also twist the neck too. Here is the next figure. It's another super colossal Tyrannosaurus Rex. This one has the light orange body with a lighter underbelly. And just like the Jurassic World Dominion Tyrannosaurus Rex, the neck is actually a little bit softer. It's like a softer plastic right there. And you can move the arms, the legs, the tail, just like the other ones. And of course, this one has the stomach compartment for eating smaller dinosaurs. And we've got some brand new figures that we can open up first before we dive into the rest of them. This one is the PNSO Wilson the Tyrannosaurus Rex. This figure is super detailed. Look at all that texturing on its body, all the various shades of colors. It's like lighter right here, there's darker shades. These are a lot more detailed than a lot of the Jurassic World figurines. But unfortunately, they're not as posable. Usually you can only move their jaw. All right, let's dig in. This first Tyrannosaurus Rex is the Battle Damage Edition. It has the light orange body. You can see that there's scrapes and slashes all over its body, even on its face and nose. And it has a fully posable body, plus the button at the top of the head for chomping. Over here, we've got an Indominus Rex, the Extreme Battle Damage Edition. With this one, you can actually turn the battle damage on and off. That's so cool. Each time that you press that button, it delivers a roar sound effect too. On the rest of the figure, the arms and the legs are fully adjustable, and there's a button at the tail that controls the jaw. Here we've got the epic roaring Tyrannosaurus Rex. This figure is light brown on the sides, dark brown on top, and the lighter underbelly. And the coolest part is the roar and shaking sound effects. Over here is the Jurassic World chomping Indominus Rex. This is a bit of an older figure. It's got the hard plastic on the back and the rubber on the neck and head. You don't see that too often nowadays. And for the chomping action, you pull down on the arms to open and close its mouth. I believe this figure is the Bite and Fight Tyrannosaurus Rex. As you can tell by the name, it has one big special feature. Press this button on its back and it does a tearing action. Swings its head around and closes its mouth real fast. And there is also a secondary button that swings its tail back and forth. I believe this figure is the Destroy and Devour Indominus Rex, but you'll notice that it has some custom coloring. So, this definitely does not look like your typical Indominus Rex. And this figure really pops out on my display shelves. My favorite part being those green eyes right there. Next up is the Stomp and Escape Tyrannosaurus Rex. As you can tell by the name, it has two features. The first, when you press this button on its back, it'll escape from its face cage. Just like that. And the second feature is stomping. When you twist the tail, it stomps its feet up and down. Comes with sound effects too. Here we have a classically colored Destroy and Devour Indominus Rex. This figure is pretty detailed over its body. It's got tons of spikes on its back. It's got those spines right along its neck. It's got some unique coloring along its eyes, right next to those orange eyes. And this figure has a few different features. First, when you bend the legs forward, it'll actually point its head down. And when you bend them back, it'll point its head upwards. Secondly, there's a button on its back that's used for slashing. And finally, there's a button on its tail for the chomping and roaring. Here is an extreme battle damage Tyrannosaurus Rex. This figure is pretty poseable. You're able to move the arms, the legs, and swing the tail around, as well as adjust the neck and open and shut the jaw by hand. But the coolest part is the battle damage that you can turn on and off, just like the Indominus Rex that we saw earlier. And you can see it on both sides. Next up, we've got the Extreme Chompin' Tyrannosaurus Rex. This figure has a more gray-brown coloring on the sides, with a darker brown on top and the light underbelly, and is adjustable just like many of the other figures. And it has the button at the top of its head for chomping and roaring. Here is another Indominus Rex, but this does not look normal. This is a hybrid Indominus Rex. So this one has some pretty awesome and unique coloring along its body. It's the only Indominus Rex to have red on its body, I believe, as well as the gold on its arms and its belly. And this dinosaur has a few features. First is a hidden button that activates its spikes on its back. Secondly is the chomping action, which you activate by moving its arm. Here we have, I believe, another extreme chomping Tyrannosaurus Rex. This one, though, has the orange body with the brown coloring on the top with the lighter underbelly. And of course, that chomping button right on the top of its head. This is the Stomp and Chomp Tyrannosaurus Rex. It has the typical orange body with the brown top and lighter underbelly. And what I really like about this figure is that you use the tail to control the head and the whole front of the body for chomping and for roaring too. Here we've got a model Indominus Rex, which I don't see that many of. But what I like about these models is that they're so much more intricately colored and textured. Check out those spikes on its back. They're so small on all those little spines and all those little horn things right along its back all the way to its tail. And just like many other model figures, you can't adjust the arms and legs. Only the mouth can open and close in these. But these sure look epic on a display shelf. Next up is the Legacy Collection Tyrannosaurus Rex. This is one of the few Tyrannosauruses that I have that are this cool green color with the black detailing on the top. It has that same button on the top of its head for chomping. And this T-Rex actually came with a baby T-Rex in the same pack. So these came together. Here is a smaller Indominus Rex figure with the battle damage on the side that you can open and close. And while most of its body is that iconic gray color, it does have some gray-green coloring along the top, which is different from most of my other Indominus Rex figures. Plus, this figure comes with a chomping action when you move the tail. Way at the bottom here, I've actually got the T-Rex Anatomy Kit. Now I am missing a few pieces to it. It's really easy to misplace these, but it's really cool that you can take this apart to check out all the different body parts within. You can take the ribs out, you can see this muscle on its tail and the bone behind it, and you can even take apart this foot right here and see what's underneath. How cool is that? This is the Bashers and Biters Indominus Rex figure. This is from the old Jurassic World toy line, and it has similar coloring to the rest of them, a little bit darker gray on top, got the battle damage on the side, and of course you can move the tail to control the face. This is a Tyrannosaurus Rex figure, but I believe it is a juvenile or even a baby T-Rex. You can see it's got the mouth restraint on, because the humans are actually healing its leg. It's got a broken leg, so it's got this bandage around it. And this figure is very adjustable too. You can move all the limbs, even at the elbows. And of course you can move the tail and twist the head around and even open and close the mouth. This is the Feeding Frenzy Indominus Rex. This is a lot smaller than most of the Indominus Rex figures, but it has quite a large face to it. And it has a few features. The first is when you press this button on its nose, get some sound effects. And the second is when you move the tail, it opens its mouth to eat, and then you can press down on its tongue to clamp shut its jaw. And last of all, I've got a few small figures in here. Got a Lego Indominus Rex figure, which is pretty cool. It's the only Lego figure that I have in this bin, at least. We've also got some miniature Tyrannosaurus Rex figures from Jurassic World. This one is green with a light underbelly, and the second one here is brown with a light underbelly as well. And I also have these two Indominus Rexes in this bin. The first one is white with silver, reflective silver on its top, and you can open and close the jaw. And the second one is a clear Indominus Rex. You can't move any parts on this figure, but I think it's pretty cool that it's see-through. First up, we've got a ginormous Spinosaurus figure. This is the Camp Cretaceous Spinosaurus with the brown body and red along its spine and face, and it's got the action button on its head for the chomping and roaring. Next up, we've got the Terran T-Rex. This T-Rex has a really cool ability. When you press down on this button, it does a tearing action. Look at that, it's like tearing away some meat. That's really cool. And it comes with a second action button to swing the tail. Next up, we've got a big old Therizinosaurus figure, just like in the Jurassic World Dominion movie. It's got the red stripe down its back all the way to the top of its head, and this figure has some special features as well. There is a button on its tail to activate the jaw and the neck, and you can use the tail to swivel the torso back and forth. Plus, check out those huge claws. Next dinosaur is the Stomp and Escape T-Rex. This figure has a light brown body with gray detailing. It has one button on the top of its back for the roaring and chomping. And the tail, when you twist it, stomps its feet. Some pretty cool sound effects that come with it too. Next up, we've got a big old Carnotaurus figure. This has a light red or orange coloring along most of its body. It's got the gray underbelly and the brown top, and tons of little bumps along its back, as well as the 2 horns on the top of its head. And this figure has an action button for the chomping, and you can use the tail to move the head around too. Here's another T-Rex that I bought just recently. This is the new Extreme Battle Damage T-Rex. Check it out, there's a button on its back that you can use to activate the battle damage on the side. That's pretty cool. And the rest of the figure is fully posable as well. Here is another ginormous T-Rex in the back. This one is camo colored, and I believe it's custom colored. That was done a long time ago. And this figure has a few actions that you can do with the tail. You can move the tail up, and it does a roaring pose. And you can move the tail down, and it does a chomping action. This dinosaur is a Baryonyx. It's got the light green coloring and the light brown and dark brown along the top. And it's got an action button on its back for the chomping. Right over here is an Albertosaurus. This figure is medium sized. It's got the dark green coloring along its body and that red maroon color all the way along the top of its head. And this Albertosaurus actually has the battle damage, both on its leg and the battle damage that you can open and close on its side. And you can even bring the rib cage up and down to reveal the stomach inside. Here is another Baryonyx figure. This one is light gray with blue and light green coloring and a little bit of white along the side. And it has the slide lever action to activate the roaring sound effects and the jaw too. Here's another Baryonyx figure. This one has light green coloring along with some darker green along the top and on its legs, and the darker brown along its neck and the top of its head too. This Baryonyx figure also has the slide lever action that you can use for the sound effects and the chomping. This is the Majingasaurus figure. It's a bit smaller. It's got the dark green coloring with the yellow and bright blue detailing along the sides. It has teeny tiny arms that are adjustable, and you can use the tail to move the neck and head around. Let's see what we got next up. This is a Carcharodontosaurus figure. It has the dark blue coloring with the yellow and brown detailing along the top. The arms, legs, and tail are fully adjustable, and there's a button on its back for the chomping. Here is a Cryolophosaurus figure. This one has some really cool crowning along the top of its head in that bright orange color, while the rest of its body is yellow and brown along the top. With this figure, you can use the tail to control the head as well. Here is another Baryonyx figure. This one has some bright orange coloring right along the top of its head though. And of course, it's got the button on its back to activate the jaw. Next up, we've got a dark red Carnotaurus figure. This dinosaur has the light underbelly and some purple detailing along the top of its body. And it is very textured. You can see those bumps and ridges all over everywhere. And of course, it's got the huge horns at the top of its head, plus an action button to activate the chomping. Next up, we've got a super bright yellow Suchomimus figure. This dinosaur has the brown detailing along the top. It's got that spine all the way from its head, all the way down almost to the end of its tail. And this figure has 2 action buttons. The first is for the jaw and the chomping, and the second action button activates the tail for swinging around. This dinosaur is a Metriacanthosaurus. It's a bit smaller than the other figures. It's got the dark red coloring with some darker detailing along the top, and the bright yellow-orange coloring right along its head. And of course, it's got an action button on its back to activate the jaw. I've got another Suchomimus figure. This one is a dark blue color with some bright yellow detailing along the top and along that spine that goes all the way to its tail. These Suchomimuses have really long and narrow snouts, still full of teeth though, and there is an action button on its back to activate the chomping. Next up is another Carcharodontosaurus figure. This one is tan in color with the brown and orange detailing along the top, and it's got all these little spikes right along its spine running all the way down to the tail. That's pretty interesting. And this figure has an action button that activates the jaw once again. That's pretty cool. Here we've got an Allosaurus figure with the light tan coloring along the underbelly and the sides, and the darker blue along the top of its back all the way to the top of its head. This figure also has the slide lever action for a bunch of different sound effects and chomping actions. Over here we've got a big Dilophosaurus figure in the bright red coloring along with the green, brown, and red along its frills, and that super bright yellow crown on the top of its head too. This figure is pretty basic though, so it doesn't have any action buttons, but you can still move the arms, the legs, and the tail, as well as move the frills back and forth. Here is a basic Spinosaurus figure. This one is a lot smaller than the Spinosaurus that we saw at the beginning of this video, and this one has the dark green coloring, but still has the iconic red spine and the red around the eyes as well. And on this figure, you can't open and close the jaw, but you can just move the arms, the legs, and the tail. Next up, we've got a huge Carnotaurus figure. This one has some darker red, basically brown coloring along the side. It has a dark gray underbelly and the black along the top. And this figure has a few actions too. The tail actually controls the head, so you can swing that around and up and down, and there's a button on the tail to activate the jaw too. Here is another Cryolophosaurus figure. This one is a dark blue color. It's got the light underbelly and some white detailing on the sides, and then a bunch of red along its back and on the crown on the top of its head too. And just like the other one that we saw, you can use the tail to control the neck. Here is the Baryonyx from the Hammond collection. This Baryonyx is way more adjustable than a lot of figures that you'll see in here. Check that out. You can move its elbows and its arms, all over on its legs. It's pretty realistic with its movement, and it's got a bit more texturing than a lot of the other Baryonyx figures that I have. Looks like we've got some mini Dilophosaurus figures in here. This first one is a soft purple color, and it's got some yellow, orange, and red on its frills. Looking pretty scary. And I've also got this soft green Dilophosaurus that's also got some orange and some yellow on it. And this one actually has an action that when you move the tail, it springs the frills up. That's really cool. Here is the Irritator figure. Most of this figure is dark brown. It's got a little bit of the light underbelly, and it's got some cool dark blue and light blue detailing all along its spine, all the way to the top of its head. And check out that super long mouth with all those teeth. All right, looks like we got another giant Dilophosaurus figure in here. This one is green and has red frills and the red crown. And just like the other one, you can open and close the frills, as well as move the arms, legs, and the tail too. Next up, I believe that this is the Roarivore Allosaurus. This dinosaur is gray all along its body and has the yellow detailing right along the top of its body, all the way to the tip of its head. Here is another Metriacanthosaurus figure. This one is a dark mustard yellow along most of its body and underbelly, and it's got that dark green detailing along the top of its back all the way to its head. And it has an action button on its back for chomping the jaw. We've got another Albertosaurus figure in here. This one does not have the battle damage on its side though. It's got the bright orange detailing on its side all the way up to its eyes, while the rest of its body is a dark green color. This figure has an action where you can move the tail to control the head, as well as press the button on its tail to activate the jaw too. Check it out, another Baryonyx figure. This one has the bright reflective blue coloring on the top of its head, while the rest of its body is a soft brown color and a dark gray blue detailing along the top. And it's got the action button on its back for the jaw. Looks like we've got a few Monolophosaurus figures in here as well. This first one is a brown color with gray detailing, and is pretty adjustable. It's a pretty small figure though. This other Monolophosaurus figure actually has some battle damage on the side that you can open and close, and is fairly adjustable as well. And this final one is a dark green color, has some yellow detailing and that bright red detailing, and check out those green eyes too. And this figure actually has an action button When you move the tail, it chomps its jaw open and closed. Last of all, we've got a Gallimimus figure. This dinosaur is a soft brown color and it has some darker brown striping along the top, and you can move its head up and down as well as its other limbs too.
Want to see more dino videos? Click the subscribe button now.